Captain's log, stardate 1513.1.
Welcome, everyone. If you've watched any amount of Star Trek, you've no doubt heard numerous references to this mysterious futuristic term called a stardate. So we're going to dive into that today and see what do they mean, how do they work, are they just nonsense, or do they contain any useful information? So we're going to begin with the original series. There were 3 seasons in the original series, and they had the following range of star dates. See, in season 1 they start with 1312 and go to about 3417. However, also notice that at the beginning of season 2 it actually decreases at 3018. And if you were to examine the individual episodes of any of the 3 seasons of TOS, you would notice that the star dates go up and down. They pretty much go all over the place over the course of a season. So while you can see there is a long-term increase from the low 1000s to the upper 5000s over the course of the show, there's a lot of inconsistency in between individual episodes. So it's hard to glean any specific information from the stardates in the original series. Now let's compare to what they looked like in the animated series.
Captain's log, stardate 5591.2.
There are 2 seasons in the animated series, and we can see their range of stardates here. In the first season, the stardates go from about 4100 to 5600, which actually would have an overlap with season 3 of TOS. And there is one exception to this range, however. In the episode The Magics of Megas 2, the stardate is mentioned as 1254.4, which would actually predate Where No Man Has Gone Before if we treat the stardates as chronological. Furthermore, in season 2 it starts at 5275, which would be roughly corresponding to the latter part of season 3 of TOS, but then they go into the 7000s, which was higher than anything we saw in the original series. Once again, we have one episode that's out of this range, which was The Practical Joker, which has a stardate here, 3183. It would seem to place it within the time frame of late season 1 or early season 2. However, we can see from a lot of these examples of how the stardates seem to go out of order that they were treated very haphazardly in TOS, in TAS, that is. Let's see how they worked out in the TOS movies.
Captain's log, stardate 8141.6.
In the motion picture, we see that the stardates start out at about 7410, which is just slightly higher than what we saw at the end of the animated series. And you can see the progression here over the course of the 6 movies. Now, in universe, these 6 movies cover approximately 20 years. However, during this time, the stardates only increase by a value of about 2000. Whereas during the original series and the animated series, which presumably take place over the 5-year mission, the stardates increase by as much as 6,000 in a much shorter time. So within the movies, these stardates are consistent in that they go in order. However, the rate of increase of the stardates is much slower than we saw during the shows. Now, does this mean that there is some kind of change within the system? In universe, we don't really know. Although obviously the real world reason is that 4-digit stardates are associated with the 23rd century, and 5-digit stardates are associated with the 24th century, which we'll see in a minute. Even though, based on the systems we see in universe, either system could go into the 5 digits or the 4 digits in whichever century. I know that's not very clear. Well, hopefully we're going to go over the TNG era and we'll clear that up a little bit.
Captain's log, stardate 43989.1.
When TNG started, the runners of the show decided to start the stardate with a 4 to represent the 24th century. This doesn't necessarily mean that if the first digit is not 4, that means it's no longer the 24th century. This was just a more or less arbitrary decision for the first of the 5 digits to be a 4. And then the second digit in the stardate corresponds to the season of the show. Like this, in season 1, the second digit is always 1. In season 6, the second digit is always 6, and so on. And since each season of the show corresponds to about 1 year in universe, therefore we can see from TNG and onwards, 1,000 stardate units is roughly equivalent to a year. In season 1 specifically of TNG, if you look at the individual episodes, the stardates tend to go up and down, similar to what they did in the original series. However, starting from season 2, with an occasional exception, the stardates go in sequential order from the beginning to the end of any season of the show. And if we look at the 7 seasons here, we can see the progression of stardates from about 41,000 in season 1, which corresponds to 2364 in universe, all the way over to season 7, where we know the stardates are now in the 47,000s, corresponding to the 7 years of the show. And we'll see this pattern continue into the TNG films.
Captain's log, Stardate 50893.5.
We see in Generations that the stardate is now 48632, which replaces about a year after the end of TNG. And also in First Contact, now the first digit is 5. It's still the 24th century. However, it's flipped over to 5 because it's been 9 years since TNG started. This First Contact takes place in 2373. Little trivia question that might come up at some point is that Insurrection is the only Star Trek film where there is no stardate reference. But finally we come to Nemesis, which is stardate 56844, corresponding to the year 2379. So both the year and the stardate coincide with 15 years after the start of TNG, which is mentioned in the dialogue of the film. Now we're going to examine the series that went on at about the same time, DS9 and Voyager.
Captain's log, Stardate 50929.4.
DS9 started during the 6th season of TNG, so you see the stardates from season 1 are in the 46,000 range, which matches up. And then from there they progress until they get to 52,000 by season 7. One of the useful things about this more consistent system that was in place through the 24th century is you can connect things from different shows or different movies and see when they happened in relation to each other. Like we knew that the First Contact had a stardate in the 50,000 range, so that connects to season 5 of DS9. And if you watch season 5, there's at least one reference to the events of First Contact. So once again, we have a consistency there. And we say that by season 7, we're at the 52,000 range. Now, DS9 also overlapped with Voyager, so let's compare the stardates over there.
Captain's log, Stardate 49301.2.
Voyager premiered the season after TNG ended, so therefore, following along with our system, the first season of Voyager started in the 48,000 range. They went all the way to the end of the 54,000s by 7th season. One slight oddity about the Voyager stardates that I noticed was that season 2 starts with 48975, which, based on the system we've been following, should have been at the end of the first season. So I did a little checking on that. The first episode of season 2, which was the 37s, was originally intended to be the season 1 finale, but for some reason it got pushed back, which is why we have this little oddity of the stardates there. However, after that, season 2 continues with the 49,000s, and the system remains consistent from there on through the rest of the show. Star Trek Enterprise, which would be the next show in the real world that came out, didn't use stardates, but rather just real world dates like we would today. And in season 1 of Picard, there was no stardate references. So this brings us up to Lower Decks.
Captain's log, Stardate 58053.9.
In the 2 seasons of Lower Decks so far, we can see Stardate starting in the 57,000 range, which is consistent with the description of the show as taking place about a year after Nemesis. And we see this moves into the 58,000s in Season 2. So this places Lower Decks in the years 23, 80, and 81 so far. Also, something interesting that I noticed is that the Stardates from Season 2 take place over only a short period of time in their given year, so I wonder if other seasons will continue in that same year, since they only go up to 130, or they'll skip to the following year like in previous shows. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Captain's log, stardate 84.
Good morning, Captain.
Forget it.
Well, to summarize what we've covered so far, Stardates within the TOS era were done rather haphazardly before a real system had been figured out. The only real pattern is that they tend to increase over time. However, when you get into the TNG era, there is a more consistent system used that actually does provide some information. Like if you hear a star date from an episode, you could tell what year it takes place in if you understand how star dates work. Unfortunately, another problem I've noticed is if you try to go back to the period in between TOS and TNG, the Stardate system doesn't really work there either. At least not how it works during the TNG era. However, I thank you for joining me for this very nerdy discussion of Stardates. I hope you have a blessed day.